Who will present the newest database on the national transfer account, but maybe there are some new faces also here. Let me also just tell you, Bernhard started to study economics, and he did a thesis in economics, which is super interesting also for our institute. It's about the equity in education, especially pre-primary education. Then he continued with the master in statistics and did a thesis on especially time use data, the 1992 and 2008 time use data, where he investigated homework and childcare. And then I was lucky, he moved to us, and he moved in fact as a PhD student to me at the Technical University to start with the Austrian National Transfer Accounts in 2010, where he did his PhD thesis then on the economic life cycle using this NTA data. And since this time, which is more than a decade, I'm so happy that Bernhard was involved in all the projects we did in economic demography, also group here related to the NTA, and especially looking at the generational economy. And I should also say Bernhard is super active also in the giving interviews on this, giving discussions. You have been on TV, in the radio, and now you are here at the big group. The floor is yours, Bernhard, and looking forward.
So I'm really happy to be here to give these presentations. One thing, because it was a lot of work and I worked on it now several other, let's say it's the output of really several years of work. Also work which was going on before, but this is not the only reason. Another reason why I'm really happy to be here, because we really understand societies much better if we adopt, or if we look at economics with a demographic perspective, or if we look at demography with an economic perspective. So this really understands us, really helps us to understand developments in our societies much better, and this is what I will show you today. First, I have to give a little bit information on the background of national transfer accounts. So national transfer accounts is a global network of researchers who do research on the interplay between demography and economics. A central part of this national transfer accounts, and this is where the name comes from, is a data set, or let's say this national transfer accounts project develops an accounting system that integrates age and sex into national accounts, and we are now working on to extend it further to other demographic characteristics. So the NTA dataset provide the basic version of it, provide information, age and sex specific information on income, on public transfers between individuals, with tax payments, social benefits received, in-kind services received, but also on private transfers. In particular, it includes estimates of transfers within households, where the expenditure of parents for the children is the most important component. So this is something that is missing in many economic statistics, this redistribution going on within households. And they also include age and sex specific information on consumption and saving. So the European national transfer accounts were developed within the Sustainable Project, which is a collaborative project financed by the European Union. And part of this project is European national transfer accounts. The idea was, in Europe we are lucky we could use Eurostat data to develop such national transfer accounts. National transfer accounts consist of aggregate data, that is data for the total economy, total income, total taxes received, total social benefits paid, and we use microdata and administrative data to distribute it by age group and by sex. So we really have information how much income each age group earns, how it is redistributed between age groups, between men and women, through government transfers, through private transfers, and how it is used for consumption and for sale. The national transfer account, one of the huge advantages is that it inherits, let's say, the structure of the national account, which is a very nice structured accounting system, and you can organize it in a sequence of accounts. They show you how primary income, so how income is earned, how much of it is paid through taxes through the government, how much benefits you receive from the government, includes also information on funded pensions, so let's say a redistribution where the government is not directly involved. National transfer accounts include information on some private transfer, in particular within households, information on disposable income by age and sex, and how this disposable income is used for consumption and saving. And I want to highlight this number in here because the data in the Data Explorer or in the dataset are organized according to these different accounts. So within this, for each of these components, it includes even more information. So, for example, type of tax paid and type of social benefits received. And it's all organized in this structure. For my NTA colleagues, there might be a difference because national transfer accounts, it's usually mostly organized in a different way. They define a life cycle deficit, define this difference between consumption and labor income, and show how it is financed through government transfers, private transfer, and asset-based allocation. The data is the same, it's just organized in a different way, and for my colleagues from MTA, I stick to this sequence of accounts, which is, let's say, it's similar to the one which is used in the European system of accounts and the national accounts. I find it more intuitive, I find it also a little bit easier, and in particular it includes a measure of disposable income, which is something very nice to compare across age group, which there is no place in this NTA organization. Well, the advantage, I said already, this is really that we inherit the national account structure, the consistency of the system, the accounting identities, that you have information, so how do you generate disposable income on primary income out of transfers, and how you use it for consumption and saving. The European National Transfer Accounts datasets are now available, it's published on Zenoro, but for you the more convenient form to access it is through the Data Explorer, which uses this data which is published, but you can, let's say, have a look at it, graph different quantities, and also download parts of it. Only those variables you're really interested in. So, but now let's start. I mean, you are not here to hear about such general things. We want to know what can we learn out of it. A research question that addressed with national accounts data and generally by population economics is, of course, how demography affects macroeconomic changes. Demographic dividend is still a hot topic, but was a hot topic in the past, and it's still in African countries, many MTA colleagues working on that. And also the changes in government revenues and expenditure is important because they're strongly age-related. So taxes are paid by those who are in employment, who earn income, and most of social benefits are received by the older population simply because pensions play such an important role. In Europe, there's not the question of demographic dividend, we are the other side of the dividend. So the basic idea of the demographic dividend is declining number of children frees up resources that can be used for investment, for physical investment, but also for investments in human capital, for education, as the Vienna School of Demography would emphasize. But we in Europe, we are the other side. You know, it's not that the number of dependent population would decline, but we are now, we had a demographic dividend, and there were many, it's in form of the baby boomers, a large share of the population in the labor force, but they are going to retire. So the dependent population is likely to increase in the future, and there is the challenge that we avoid a reversal of the demographic dividend, so that the increasing dependent population of the elderly actually needs so many resources that we have fewer resources for investment, in particular also investment in human capital for our own children. So demographic dividend, we are on the other side, and we need data to understand what is happening now in Europe. And very important topic is also inequalities between age groups, between men and women, because this forced redistribution through the aging population also changes how much we have the redistribution to the elderly population, clearly also affects the available income in different age groups. So these are important topics we want to monitor, we want to understand what is going on in European countries, and national transfer accounts, I think, are a perfect concept and a perfect data set to do so. I show you now four smaller, shorter stories, which each of them where we can learn something interesting, I think, and I hope something new about the generational economy in Europe, and it highlights how important it is to have better data, national transfer accounts and data on this relation between demography and economics. So first of all, national transfer accounts are age and sex specific, but for generating it, they are linked to national accounts, and we have to prepare national accounts data to prepare these age-specific accounts. And this, in the European national transfer accounts, I have in the Data Explorer you find a special section on aggregate data. It's also structured like that. You have information on total income. Aggregate means for the total economy, not age-specific. Just how much income is generated in the economy, how much taxes are paid, how much benefits are received. It's structured in that way. And this has a huge advantage, because national transfer accounts, as a national accounts data, it's a very smart data set, but when you want to access it, for example on Eurostat database, you have a huge mass of indicators and you have no idea of it, what they actually mean. And the way we organize it, in this structure, you can really see how they are linked. For example, it starts from GDP, how measuring what is produced in the economy, how income is generated out of GDP. There's a huge difference between income and GDP. You can check it in the data set, why this is there. And you have really detailed information on all of the subcategories. For example, what is spent on social benefit, on pension, what is spent for education, in total in economies. And I use it quite often to have a look at it, and this is what we are doing now. So this is primary income per capita in European countries, and the pattern we see, we still have the Eastern European countries where we have a huge increase in income over the period, so aggregate data I have mostly from 1995, not age-specific data. But over this period we see a huge increase in Eastern European countries. But in most other European countries, per capita income actually stagnated. In most countries from the years since 2008. There were some fluctuations, some changes, but in general there was not much happening. This decline in Italy and Spain after about 2008 to 2011, and some increase from 2014 onwards. But in principle we see this already, that European income in European economies is stagnating, except in Eastern European. We have their information on social benefits by type, and there's something important which not everybody knows. Social benefits consist in European countries almost exclusively of pensions. So pensions are really it's about 80% or something. There are two other components which are somewhat important. This is social benefits for families and for unemployment partly, but in general it's really driven by pensions, and this is why this is so affected. Social benefits is so affected by demographic changes. And when we look at the development over time and social benefits, we see that in most countries, I mean, before 2008, they increased about with income. But despite the stagnating incomes, the social benefits, mostly in form of pension, continued to increase. So we had an increase also relative to the income in the economies. So something we always think, well, demographic change will increase the spending for the elderly, we might see stagnating economies. Well, this is already happening for almost 20 years in many countries. So, well, to summarize, NDA aggregate data, have a look at it. I find it useful. I think it can be really useful also for you if you are interested in general changes in the economy, to test if social benefits increase relative to income, tend to decrease in the long term. Show it really nice way. Well, income growth in many countries is stagnating in Europe, and expenditure for the older population is increasing relative to income already for some time. So, but the highlight of NDA is of course the age-specific data, and first we'll have a look at employment data. Well, employment income, I mean, it's, let's say, normal people would say it's something like gross income, so including all taxes and include also the social contributions made by employers. In the national accounts, it's captured as compensation of employees and as mixed income, and in Louis Silk you have it as income from employment and self-employment. When we look at age-specific data, there are some striking things. First of all, this change over time. Of course, people in Europe stay longer in the labor force, or increase their labor force participation in older ages since 2008, and this is clearly visible in the shift of the age profiles to the right. So older people generate a higher share of total income.
Bernhard, does the online database cover all countries for the same years, or?
Yes.
Or is it, so it's always 2008 until some reason?
2008 to 23, well, largely yes, only sometimes at the beginning or the end might be one or two countries missing. We see for age income for Poland, it's of course what it reflects is this huge increase in employment income, which we already saw in the aggregate data. There are some countries which are more interesting, Italy, well, more interesting than other things going on. This is this decline in employment income generally over all age groups and working age population. But Italy, it also really this remarkable shift to the right. So compared to 2008, people stay much longer in the labor, or they increase their labor force with this.
Does this only refer to employed people, or does it include housewives?
No, it's averages overall.
So housewives are included?
Yes, exactly. So it also reflects increase in employment rates. Something that is, for Italy, we knew it kind of what was happening. Some more interesting things are the Nordic countries like Sweden or Denmark, because if you look at aggregate data, you will see even since 2008 somewhat increase in income and also in employment income. But if you look at age-specific data, we see that this increase was concentrated in the older working population, and the increase for the younger working population until about 40 was more or less inexistent. So, and this is really something that NTA is really useful for, to highlight these age-specific differences also in income changes. Well, here I just summarized this information for a couple of countries. So how much was the increase in employment income at age 55 to 39 and at age 40 to 59? And surprisingly, with few exceptions, I think of Estonia and Lithuania, the increase for the older working population was in all the countries higher than for the younger one. Partly it might, for some countries, it reflects the higher labor force participation of women in these age groups, 40-45, so this could be a thing, but this is not the only effect, so there will really also on per capita basis. And interesting, this Denmark would be that there was really a decline for the. I mean, in survey data, you always have to be careful, so that the estimates are subject to some variation, but in general, the patterns would not change if you look at another year. So this is really striking patterns. Well, so there's a good thing. European economies are adapting to demographic changes. So the employment of older people is increasing, reflected also in the age profiles of employment income, but the income change over this time differs between age groups. And this is really nicely highlighted in this ADA data. And now there comes my personal highlight, let's say, regarding what I learned out of my work on MTA. This is why do European welfare systems, how do they differ regarding the distribution between age groups? Well, if you look at age-specific social benefits, so this is all cash allowances you get from the government, they include mainly pensions, but also support for families and unemployment. It's clear that they are mostly directed to the elderly, the older population in form of pensions. So the other components play a minor role, but there are differences across countries. In Denmark, they have a stronger support of the younger population, especially, let's say, people between 20 and 25. And this is reflected in the family benefits in these age groups. So this is really remarkable across countries. We don't see this in other countries. Poland also has quite a strong support for families, but it's mostly targeted as parents. So what the difference is that in Denmark, people really move out of their home quite early, and obviously they are supported through government's benefits to do so. And this is reflected in age-specific income. But the huge differences are not, let's say, this is a pattern what we see in other countries. What makes really the difference is shown when we look at the older population and show how the income in the older population is distributed. And now I show you some graphs that are organized a little bit differently. So this is not age anymore, this is income percentiles. So it shows how much social benefits on average each percentile gets. So these are the income rich, how much social benefits they get on average. They are those with the lowest income and how much they get. Everything is measured relative to the average income at age from 30 to 49. So what you can see here, this is France, about less than 20% population receive social benefits of a size that is corresponds to the average income in working age. So there are a considerable share of people with quite high pensions. And this is Italy is a very special country that is characterized by a large share of the population with extremely high pensions. So the upper percentiles, I cut it already because they are somewhere in the roof, but about more than 30% of the population receive a pension that is higher than the average income in working age. So this is really, it's characterized by really a high share on generous pensions to older population in the top of the income distribution. Italy is really a very extreme case. But in countries where the pension expenditure is rather low, or relatively low, like Sweden, partly is organized through a funded pension system, we have very few people who receive pensions which exceed the average income of workers. And this is something that is really ignored in the debate, because we always speak of increasing retirement age. But if you pay to, let's say, 30% of the population a pension that is twice the income of the working age population. This makes a difference for total expenditure, and this explains almost most total expenditure. So if you increase the retirement age for a person who receives an average pension corresponding to a bit less of average income and working age, you make a small difference. But if you pay pensions that are 3 times or 2 times or 3 times the income of a working age person over a period of 30 years. So this makes really a huge difference also for total expenditure. So in Poland, so Eastern European countries are also characterized by a rather low social expenditure also for pensioners, and we also, for Poland, for example, we also don't see this better, that there would be many people who have pensions that by far exceed income of working age adults. Austria, of course, because in Austria I have a look. Austria is something in between Italy and, well, there is a considerable high share of people with really high pensions, so which also explains the relatively high expenditure for pensions in Austria. Additional to the retirement age, but this is a factor that shouldn't be ignored. This is one of the major factors that explains the total size of pensions. For the big data sheet, we show in the Wittgenstein Center data sheet, which provides nice information on demography. We also calculated an indicator to compare across European countries, and it shows how much of income is spent for people at old age, and this is closely related to the indicator as how much of social benefits is received by those in the upper half of the income distribution. So there's almost linear relationship. Total expenditure for old age is closely related how generous the pension system is with those in the top of the income distribution. Okay, this I will skip. This shows you the same thing. This difference is in European countries, that there are some welfare systems, like the Danish system, provides most of social benefits to those in the lower end of the income distribution, and in many other countries which actually provides the higher share of social benefits for those who are actually in the top of the income distribution. Yeah, this is how European welfare states differ. The total size of redistributing to the rich is closely related to the total size of expenditure. And interesting is also it's a paper which was published already some time ago, that shows that the countries with a low redistributions to rich pensioners are also those who provide more support for the working age population, in particular also to families. I always wanted to continue this work because I really love it. It really shows nice things, but then I was occupied with the data, so I hope that it can go on in the future. So this is something really, really nice, and there is another thing I wanted to show you that can be done with European national transfer accounts data. This is disposable income. So in autumn there was an article in the Financial Times which says something that French pensioners now have higher income than working age adults. So this was quite popular in social networks. There were articles in many magazines, and I thought, well, if it's so popular and gets so much attention, I think this is something we can also do with national transfer accounts data. And yeah, this is what I do. But there's another interesting thing. Well, this is based on equalized household income. I wonder, does everybody know here what equalized household income is? It's basically a measure that is not it's called income, but it's more or less a measure of standard of living. So you give consumption rates to individuals, reflecting that children need less, and if there are more people in the household, you don't need to proportionally increase spending to have the same level of welfare, so to say. So you give consumption rates based on the number of households and their age. First person in the household get a weight of 1. The next adult a weight of 0.5, and children let's say a weight of 0.3. And if you add it up, you get for a household, for example, with 2 adults and 2 children, 2.1, let's say, effective consumers. In a household with 2 adults, you get 1.5 effective consumers. So first, 1 for the first adult, 0.5 for the second, and in the first households, it's 1.5 for the 2 adults, and then always 0.3 for the kids. So if household A has an income of 4,200 euros, he is equally well off as household B, the smaller one with 3,000. So you can compare the standard of living across households. But this has really disadvantages. It distorts the results for the 20 to 34-year-old when they live in the household from the parents, because it takes household income, it doesn't reflect individual income. And it's strongly shaped by household structure effects. So in old age, the share of lone parents and lone people or the household size decreases, which more or less decreases the need of, increases the need of income, and equivalent income declines. And you cannot really decompose it because of this taking account of economies of scale. It's not easy to say that distinguish the different income components, or let's say development measure of transfers to children. But this is what we can do with NDA data. So we have individual data. We also have information on transfers to children. And so it should be quite straightforward to develop a measure of disposable income. So this is equivalized household income in France, and by age. And we see there was a break in the time series. It is not my fault actually. I checked it with Eurostat and they have the same pattern. So they did something different from 2021 or something onwards. And my guess is that for this Financial Times article, they used the older data. And I think that France, the Statistic Institute in France, defined income in a somewhat different way, and this was reflected in the results that French pensioners are so well off compared to other countries, because I can't find this pattern in NDA data. Well, for equivalized income, for most countries it shows about the same. Here's the pattern for Sweden, and Sweden or Denmark it would be because young people move out of the household of the parents quite early. It increases the need, suddenly they're in their own household, and compared to other households that have rather low income. This is, in Italy, for example, don't have this effect because people stay in the household of the parents and they profit from the income of the parents. So depending on your research question, but this is often not something that I want to have. For Poland, we reflected the increase in disposable income. So, and it does include all the components we need for calculating disposable income. There is just there are a couple of problems, not just a couple of problems. That NDA scales asset income. But asset income for most households is really not important. It's highly skewed. Some households receive high asset income, but for most households it's not really an issue. So this is something you might not want to include at this stage, or use other measures not to use. And estimates of private transfers are subject to somewhat high uncertainty, which increases, or it makes the comparison across time difficult. So, I will keep it short, as these intra-household transfers in LDA are more or less based on assumption connected with some data, is that it's basically, we estimate also consumption of each individual, and the assumption is that consumption of children, or consumption of all household members who don't have own income, is covered by other household members who have income. And this is how we get this intra-household transfers. This is how our transfers received. So we have an assumption, a consumption assumption, also that children need to consume a little bit less. This is why they receive
rather small transfers. It increases with the age of the child, so the highest transfers they receive then about at the age with 18, 19, and then the inter-household transfers receives again because people have their decrease again because people have their own income. So the shape, the pattern is clear. Those don't have income, they get transfers from the other household. Clearly, children don't pay transfers to their siblings, but then with the age households, people have their own children. They of course provide transfer to them. The highest transfers are made. 2 children are made at the age of 45, about 40, 45. Younger children are somewhat cheaper. So let's say at age 30 you have children, younger children are cheaper. The children become older, they need more resources, and that decreases also the transfers. And we can integrate this in our measure of disposable household income, and the pattern looks basically, disposable income patterns looks basically like that. Children receive mostly household transfers from intra-household transfers from their parents, then they start generating own income. It's of course at the age of 20 you start having income, you don't have responsibilities for own children, that is your disposable income is quite high. Until age 30, then many people have children and provide transfer to children. That is why the disposable income is increasing, and then the children get their own income and leave their household of their parents is increasing again. And this is the basic shape. It's basically the same in all the countries. Also in France, if you use this NTA disposable income measure, you would also get the result that the income of the working age population is lower than the older population, simply because households in working age have to provide for their own children. This reduces the disposable income, but the same effect you would have in equivalence income. A difference is Poland. This is in Poland characterized by low fertility rates, but high income for young people. This is the group who has the highest disposable income. It also increases at older ages. They have lower income, so even employment income in Poland is somewhat more shifted to the young, but of course their own children make the bigger difference. So disposable income declines again. So that's quite interesting pattern we can observe. So I use the NPA measure of calculating this disposable income of the working age population and old age, or let's say the relation of those in working age to those age. And yes, working age population have lower disposable income. It's like that in almost all countries, because it reflects the group of parents who have to provide. It's the interesting thing is that in contrast to this Financial Times article in France, it's even considerably high. So I think there was some mistake in the data for this article. Well, I think this age comparison, you have to be very careful with it, because what makes a difference is clearly being parent or not parent, including families. This also creates the age pattern. So, in both cases, like equalized income and this NPA disposable income, you have the effect that the declining number of children would increase your income. It's clear that for some application, for example, if you check if the income of countries has an influence on fertility, this is clearly not the thing you want to have. That's why it's great if you have a very flexible system that allows you to define your income measure that you really need for your question in a flexible way. And NTA provides such flexible information because you have the information on employment of the different components income. It also can separate these transfers to the children from the other income components. So, well, this was, I left out, this was just 3 examples how you could use national transfer accounts data, and it shows where the results are something where you might say in the end, well, that was something new, that was not something let's say something new, we could get information from NTA. Well, first point, the changes I want to make today is the changes in employment or income general differ between age groups, and it's really important that we have information on such changes. One of these, what I call the highlight, is that the social welfare systems are really shaped by how generous they are to rich pensioners. And when you look at disposable income, really it's important to distinguish by parental status, because this shapes both equalized income and this NTA, disposable income. In general, I think that NTA provides information that is not captured in other data sources, but is really important for our societies, because Europe faces the challenge of this reversal of the demographic dividend. We see these stagnating incomes in many countries, the increasing distribution to the elderly population. In Austria, we have these fiscal problems, this, let's say, stagnating GDP, and most likely demography plays a major role actually in that as well. And it's really important that we have data sources to understand this better and investigate this. And I would say NTA fills really an important gap to understand this relationship between demography and economics. And this is why I hope you use our data for your research. I want to say just one couple of sentences. We continue our work on national transfer accounts with new stuff in a new project. Isabel is also working on it. And we will integrate wealth data. This is an aspect that has also a generational component, but this is ignored so far. We also try to shed more light on consumption, because it makes a difference if, let's say, there are huge price increases in consumption of necessities like housing or food, and this might affect the young more than older age groups, so it's important to have there also more information. And yes, thank you. I hope you found it interesting, and yeah, thank you so much.